Welcome to the Temple of Geek Podcast. My name is Monica, and I will be your host as we discuss the Disney animated film Encanto. If you haven't caught up with the film, you may want to save this episode and tune in later because there will be spoilers. If this is your first time tuning into the Temple of Geek Podcast, welcome. The Temple of Geek Podcast has been around since 2012 and is hosted by a variety of geeks from the Temple of Geek team. Here we cover all manner of geek and pop culture news and events. To our returning listeners, thank you again for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. With me today is Temple of Geek writer and contributor, Kristen, and new to the podcast is media and content creator, Amanda. Welcome to the podcast. Can you guys please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about you?
Go first? Okay, hi. Hi, my name is Amanda Castrillo. I go by Amanda Just Vibin on all media platforms, and I am a content creator, influencer, and I mostly make content about media, commentary, comedy, like a lot of Marvel. I used to do a lot of Star Wars, just kind of whatever's currently going on, and I've been a longtime nerd, and I'm glad to finally be able to talk about what I love and have an audience to talk about what I love with. So it's great.
And I'm Kristen Chavez. I am, as Monica said, a writer and contributor here at Temple of Geek. I have also worked on the Your Biggest Fangirl podcast, where we discussed everything fangirl and really just try to emulate what it means to be a fan and a very positive fan experience. And that is something that I am still passionate about to this day. No matter what I'm doing, I feel like I am still a full-time fangirl regardless. So thank you again, Monica, for having me here.
Oh my God, I'm so happy to have you here. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, my name is Monica. I'm the editor-in-chief at Temple of Geek, and we are a completely fan-run and fan-funded website where we do projects like Portrait of a Fangirl, which is our web series, and we write about just the stuff that we love about. And there's one rule at Temple of Geek, and that's you don't talk about it unless you really, really love it. And today we're talking about Encanto because it's something that I really, really love. And I was a little bit sad that it wasn't getting the hype when it first was released. But when it hit Disney Plus, it got a lot of hype. So I'm so excited to talk to you guys about it. So let's get into it. In the Walt Disney Animated Studios Encanto, Mirabel, the only ordinary member of her extraordinary family, discovers that the magic surrounding their home is in danger, and she might be her family's last hope. Set in Colombia, the film embraces the diversity, culture, people, and the music of the country. Encanto explores compelling but complicated relationships within families and asks the question, how well do we know our families and how well do they know us? The film stars Stephanie Beatriz as the voice of Mirabel and John Leguizamo as the voice of Bruno, with original songs composed by Lin-Manuel Miranda. So the first thing I really want to talk about is the popularity of this film. And like I said, I was shocked that this film wasn't as popular when it was released in theaters, but it's getting so much hype now. What do you think it is about the film that is making Encanto such a viral sensation on social media and in homes?
So what I think, especially now in like a still current pandemic time, the way we consume media and the way that we interact with media is much different than it was previously. A lot of people are kind of foregoing theater experiences. They're really only going to like the big, like ginormous hype things. So when there is something kind of flying under the radar, like Encanto did, it's not going to get as much notoriety, especially when people are trying to save. They're not going out as often. They're not doing stuff as often. And then the actual nature of Encanto in itself, it's very, like, especially growing up in a Latina household like I did, it's a very Latin-centric story. So it's something that a group of people are going to understand, and then like another vast majority of people are not going to understand. So they're probably going to overlook it in favor of something like maybe Frozen. So something that would be more palatable to them, something that they would understand instantly. So what I think happened with Encanto is especially when I think what the biggest thing that happened is just like TikTok loves a good beat and the internet loves a good beat and they love a good sound and they love something that you can kind of make a mimetic mutation and turn into something else. So when I think what I think happens is that when We Don't Talk About Bruno blew up, that's when the movie blew up, because all of a sudden there were all these videos, all these sounds, all these things that people were talking about. And that one song kind of launched Encanto from kind of being one of those Disney movies that came out and people didn't notice to we don't talk about Bruno, no. Like it happened like that.
I think that's so true, because honestly, I think seeing all the references to we don't talk about Bruno. Encanto was already on my list of things to watch, but grad school started, new semester, so needed a moment to get my grip. But I think once I started seeing all those posts and everyone's talking about this song where they're not supposed to be talking about someone, I was like, I need to bump this up to the top of my list. Like, this is the first thing that I need to see. And I think that's like a great point that you mentioned with the pandemic in particular. I was reading an article this morning about some of the challenges behind that too. Of course, it came out in, I guess, November, and right around the time when children were able to get their first vaccines or, their second vaccines. So it was a good timing until Omicron hit. So already it was tricky. And I think, Amanda, you made a great point about you kind of have to choose which things you're going to see. Of course, with Spider-Man, that was a huge success. Everyone was going kind of regardless, still a success within the pandemic parameters. But I think with that, it's a little unsure of where that's going to be streaming next. You don't know when, it's not going to be on Disney Plus necessarily because of the deal with Sony. You don't know when you're going to be able to watch in your own home. And I think you're also, especially with things like the MCU, you're worried about those spoilers, right? Not as much, I think, with Disney animated films. But so I think that was definitely its challenge with its theatrical release. But I will be very curious to see kind of its, at-home streaming success, especially out of all of this. And how do you measure what's a successful film within a pandemic? I think I was reading it was still doing very well, for the year that it's in. But I think it's really blown up, I think, with word of mouth in particular, like this new digital type of word of mouth of just, from anything from the songs to just the storyline, or people finally being able to see their families represented on screen. And I think that goes beyond Latinx families. I am half Salvadoran on my father's side, never really had necessarily that kind of experience, but it still spoke to me. It was still like a very, I think once you get into it, you see, oh yes, this is a family. This is everyone has those type of family members and how we get along. And, I think especially speaks to people with multiple generations under their roof too. Which I think Lin-Manuel Miranda or some of the filmmakers had discussed with recent interviews. Of course, this comes when a lot of people are in lockdown and maybe living with multiple generations that hasn't necessarily happened before. So yeah, I think there are just so many different avenues that you can find some sort of connection with it. But I think, yeah, the hurdle is that first introduction. What's going to be the thing that pushes you to go see it the first time?
Yeah, Kristen, and I think you're right about as far as how well it's doing in the pandemic. So, for example, Thanksgiving weekend for Tangled and Moana. Tangled was 56 million at the box office for opening weekend. Moana was 48 million. Coco did about 50 million. Those were all Thanksgiving weekend, films like Encanto that came out. So if you compare Encanto to that, Encanto only did about 12 million opening weekend. So it might be considered a flop, right? But in pandemic times, that's a big deal. Still, it was number one in the box office when it came out, ahead of Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is a major franchise. It's a huge franchise. And it starred Paul Rudd, which is a big pull right there. So I think you're right. In pandemic terms, it was successful, but it was hit with the not all the kids are vaccinated and the Omicron variant and all that. So I think that's a really great choice. I think another reason too why it's been, such a viral sensation is because of the ensemble cast, right? Yes, Maribel's the main character, right? But there's so many characters in this movie, right? So many family members, so many ways to see yourself, right? So Amanda, you were saying like people are making all these TikTok videos about, we don't talk about Bruno, but there was also like Surface Pressure from Luisa that was really trending there for a while. And, Dolores obviously was like a huge fan favorite, and so there's all these characters that people are starting to see themselves in or just relate to, even if it's not like a physical representation, right? But it's just like relating to that character. So I think having so many choices versus like Moana is just like Maui and Moana, right? So you may not you may enjoy the film, but you may not necessarily like relate to those. But with Encanto, there's so many characters that people can relate to, and so you have a pick. You could be the mom who heals everybody with their home cooking, and there's the people that relate to abuela, and there's just so many options. So I think that does help. But even still, do you think if other stories with this much representation had come out during the TikTok era, do you think that they would have gone as viral as Encanto has? Or is Encanto unique in its way that it's gone viral?
So I do think that Encanto has the uniqueness in the way that it went viral because, again, at the core of TikTok, TikTok loves a good sound. So the catchiness and the versatility and the just overall boppiness of We Don't Talk About Bruno kind of wrote people in who wouldn't have otherwise maybe taken a second look at the movie. And so that kind of was the unifier because I saw people from all backgrounds, like every person was like, no se habla de Bruno. Like it was just like everywhere. It was everywhere. And so I think that's what made it specifically like blow up on TikTok. Now, as far as like the diversity is concerned, for like personally, I saw my family in this movie, and I think it kind of finally gave like Latina creators such as myself an opportunity to talk about our experiences and talk about what our lives are like and talk about our family dynamics. So it gave basically just a way to open the door to a discussion to creators who wouldn't have otherwise had an opportunity to talk about things like that. And especially with like Dolores, like I looked at Dolores and I'm like, oh, that's a Latina girl that looks like me. I was just like, I normally when people think about, and I've had this in my own content comments before, where people will be like, oh, I thought you were this. I didn't think you were like Latina, and they don't think that Latin people can look different ways. They have this one rigid view of what the Latina community looks like. So when I got like into the creator fund for TikTok and I announced it, a lot of my followers were like, I didn't even know you were Puerto Rican. I just thought you were like half black. And that's what they said. And I'm just like, there's different, like you can be multiple different races within the Latina community and people just genuinely didn't know. Or like I would talk about a Latina character who was black like Miles Morales and they'd be like, whoa, I just thought they were black. And I'm like, no, you can be black. You can be both. Like you can be both. And so when I saw Dolores, I was like, she looks like me. And that just kind of like gave because I'm a grown woman, I'm going to be 25. And I had that moment of like seeing myself for the first time on screen in like this major Disney movie. And yeah, there have been other characters before, but I'm like specifically a Latina girl who looked like me. And I didn't have that growing up. And I was just like, that's me. Like I can look at her and be like, that girl looks like me. And I think that's really important because a lot of people don't have that growing up. A lot of people have to wait until they're in their late teens and early 20s to see themselves represented on screen, to see their families represented on screen in a positive light, and to see their struggles and experiences not sugar-coated, but actually told in a way that is palatable for a younger mind. So I think that on top of the fact that like We Don't Talk About Bruno is just kind of a universal bop to the point that it beat out Let It Go.
Right.
It just kind of stacked on top of each other to create this phenomenon that was 2 months later than its release.
Yeah, it's become like a real slow burn because there are so many layers to this film that resonate in various different ways. And I think I mean, I'm sure we've all seen the different like viral stories going around of like a little boy seeing Antonio and being like, he looks like me. And Antonio, if there's one criticism about the film, needed more of him because he's the cutest child Disney has ever animated. I'm sorry. So adorable. But yeah, and like they made a very conscious choice in making a very realistic family that, of course, like being Latinx, like it's an ethnicity. There are a lot of races involved and like the different backgrounds, talking about colonialism or indigenous people, all those different layers. So you can see that visually represented in the family. But then even within the actual content of the film, we're talking about generational trauma, about the struggles that Abuela had to go through and that Abuela Pedro went through, that could speak to a lot of people's different experiences, Latinx or not. So I think that's something where, because there are so many layers to it, and it is palatable for like a lot of generations too. Little kids can see it and kind of relate either to an individual character, but also start getting a little bit of that understanding. I think you see that with the two times that Abuela is telling the story about how they came to Encanto. The very first time you see it, when Mirabel is 5, it's okay, here's like a little bit more sanitized version, like just we came here. And that makes sense to a 5-year-old. You're not going to go in too much detail. But then when she finally tells the whole story when Mirabel is older, and so the moment when Abuela is able to tell Mirabel the whole story, a lot more detail about what happened, she is older, she is able to like come to those new decisions and conclusions that I think really adds a layer of like seriousness and I don't know. I think relatability for, adults, teens, anyone that's watching it that is able to like see a little bit deeper as well. And I think on the point with the music, as you said, I think it's a bop all around for all of the songs. I think especially with something like We Don't Talk About Bruno, there's all these different melodies going on at once. And it is something that Lin-Manuel Miranda is just so skilled at. It is pulling from the Broadway tradition of having multiple, melodies and songs and people singing like different lyrics, that I'm always a sucker for. Yeah. And so it just made it so good and they really brought it in. But then you have the songs by Luisa and Isabella too. What Else Can I Do is kind of the Let It Go song.
I love that.
But in a more positive, she's like, oh, I'm letting go in a positive way that's able to like, I'm not shutting down anymore. So yeah, I think it's emotionally is very resonant with a lot of people. That, yeah, I'm going to be watching it again and again. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. I watched it 3 times. I bawled my eyes out the first 2 times. The third time I was watching it with my husband. He didn't like it. We're working through that. So it's one of those things, like when you say like Luisa, that kind of like positive like outlook of the Let It Go song. And it's so funny because upon like rewatch, especially since like if you look at the songs together, like right after each other, they have things that kind of answer to other songs if you watch it again. So when it comes to We Don't Talk About Bruno, we have both Dolores and Isabella singing, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And they're just saying it over and over and over again. When you can see their animations and their faces, they do not look fine. They do not look happy. They don't sound happy. But they're saying it over and over and over again in this organized chaos. And then you have in Isabella's song, What Else Can I Do?, when she finally makes something prickly and not perfect and symmetrical. And it's also a callback to earlier when she was making flowers in her head and one of them came out like a daisy. And Abuela picked out the daisy and left all the pink ones. So it was like kind of a little bit of a tidbit earlier to show that she can make other things. She just suppresses it. And then finally she kind of explodes, cactus, and then everything starts getting colorful and crazy and beautiful. And then Mirabel sings this one part that's mirroring Isabella's melody from We Don't Talk About Bruno. It's like, it just seems that you've been perfect since the moment you opened your eyes. And it's the same melody as Isabella's part in We Don't Talk About Bruno. So it's just kind of cool callbacks between the songs that, again, is very Broadway and very stage production, because we have reprises all the time on stage productions. We have callbacks to other songs on other stage productions. It's just really cool to see that implemented in a Disney movie that's like at its core still a movie, but very much like could be adapted to a stage production, kind of like that.
And I'm ready for
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Bring me the Encanto musical.
Bring it to me. I will fly to New York so fast.
It's like, it's just going to be a road trip. We're going to go right away.
Yes.
Well, even just like the words "I'm fine," like that was like at the core of Mirabel's "I Want" song too, you know. And I think like Louisa says it, so it's kind of like this recurring thing. And how many times have I said that to myself? Like, I'm fine, and it's like, you know, the
Everything's
gif
fine.
of the
coffee cup on fire.
Yep, that's it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you guys. So speaking now about like the storyline and how the film ended, give me your thoughts on the storyline and how you felt the film ended. I guess basically your overall take on the story.
Got it. So my overall take on the story, one thing that I probably would have wished for would be for it to be a teensy bit longer, maybe like an extra 30 minutes to kind of, I feel like the lowest of the low point was a little bit too short. Because, you know, in every story, there's like, it goes up, it goes up, it goes up, and then bow. And then you have that low point, and then you have to climb back up. I feel like the lowest point was a little teensy bit too short. However, it's still told visually and it's still told musically. Because if you listen to the lyrics within the songs, that's the biggest thing about this movie in particular, is that a lot of it is told through song. And while other Disney movies are musicals, they still have long periods between the song parts that are all dialogue. So you can kind of fill in those blanks. But this one is predominantly music. And so you have to pay attention to the lyrics. You have to pay attention to what the characters are telling each other, because most of the time they're singing. And Mirabel, even when she's going up into Bruno's tower, she's still singing La Familia Madrigal, and she's still like huffing and puffing, singing a song while she's struggling to go up. So my overall take of the movie is I loved it. I watched it 3 times. I think this is the first Disney movie that I've watched in rapid succession since I was a kid. And it made me feel like a kid again. And it made me feel like nostalgic again. It made me reflect on my own experiences. And I just kept watching it and watching it and watching it, all gross with tears all over my eyes. And it was just an overall amazing movie. And I loved the ending, because the ending, again, it was very visual. And you had to focus on the fact that you had to just know in your mind that Rome wasn't built in a day. The house wasn't built in a day. The healing wasn't done in a day. It's the beginning of getting better. It's the beginning of healing. It's not just, all right, boom, cool, we're dope. Like they still have work to do, and they came together to do all that work together. And you even see at the end, Isabella is still all blotchy, different colors, all mixed together, kind of into this gross brown color, because that's what all the colors make. And then finally she decides, I want to be blue. And then she, bam, and turns blue. And she's like, yeah. And then Luisa and Isabella and Mirabel have this beautiful moment of just like, yeah, sometimes we're not good, and that's okay. And it even says, it's like, I'd like a new foundation. It isn't perfect, but neither are we. And you have to look at that and watch what's going on to kind of fill in the blanks of what happened when you didn't see people talking face to face the whole time. And I think that's kind of a switch that a lot of audiences have not had to make in a while, because again, you will just have the characters talking and saying what they mean. This one, it's much more implied.
Yeah, I think, and that's what for me makes a good story and a good movie. You're showing and you're not telling, right?
Yes.
And I think, and sometimes you're singing and not telling, to get especially into the heart of what people are thinking, but I feel similarly in that when you get to that low point, especially around Dos Oruguitas, the way that like after Casita falls and Mirabel runs away, it does seem like immediately Abuela comes. So it feels like there should be like maybe a half scene more, but at the same time, I feel like it's condensed enough that I also I wouldn't have wanted it to be dragged out. So I'm actually kind of curious, like if we ever got like production notes on the back end of like the making of, like what were some of those deleted scenes? Like I'm sure that there was thoughts of like, okay, well, how do we like add some extra beats and extra steps in here that they, presumably were like, it's not driving the story enough. Like it is just better if we just get to it, and when do you make that kind of call story wise? But overall, I think like it hits the mark, and it is kind of nice that it's just a quiet moment, that it is just like Mirabel and Abuela just talking about this, and like really the person ultimately that has to open up the most is Abuela at the end of the story. It is kind of like it is Mirabel's the one that helps heals the crack, but she has to heal it with Abuela's help, who kind of started it in the beginning. So I think it's like I kind of go back and forth every time I'm like watching it or rewatching that scene. I'm like, oh, it needs to be longer, but it's good as it is. But either way, I mean, I just want more of that entire world and the music. But yeah, and the music, as you say, like it does what a good musical is supposed to do. It drives the story forward. It drives the characters forward and what they're supposed to do. And I love what you said, Amanda, about like especially at the end, the healing wasn't done in a day. We definitely see the start of everyone starting to come together again. Bruno is there. He's helping along with everyone else, and everyone is pitching in. Louisa gets to have a break at a moment. She's lifting like donkeys throughout the entire movie, and then finally they're just like, no, you go sit in the hammock. You deserve to like put your feet up for a little bit. So it's like, it's still, there is some work to do, but then even with like Peppa and her, I was going to say slight grudge, but I guess it's not that slight about Bruno ruining her wedding. But she's the first one to run and hug Bruno and lift him up, so it's like, it's all of these like pent up emotions that a part of me, again, wants to see them have those moments of talking it out. But that's also what fan fiction is for.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like it is like, we can have those moments there. And I think like, we just want to like, the story beats of everything is open to interpretation. Again, like, where is Mirabel's door? Does she have a gift? I don't want necessarily every little thing answered. So for me, I thought the ending just brought it all together in a really beautiful way. And overall, same with the story.
And even like you said, like with like Peppa and like the little grudge she had. And it's funny because like, remember in the last part of the song where he was like, let it in, let it out, let it snow, let it go. And then you see toward the end, she's dancing and she's happy and it's hailing.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not so nice weather and it's not so like flowery, beautiful, clear skies. It's hail. And so she's still able to express her emotions, even though they are not entirely pretty and flowery and fluffy, like kind of like Isabella, where she's like finally able to express herself, and it's not in this sanitized, like clear skies way. And it's just basically bringing out the best in each other while also accepting the not so good parts. Because I think the biggest part of fixing the cracks is acknowledging that there's a crack in the first place. And that's that's another thing that I see a lot of people do, where they don't want to acknowledge that something is wrong. They don't want to acknowledge that something is wrong with them, or something is wrong with the way they're acting, or something is not good. They don't want that. They want to appear like everything is okay. And that's the big issue of the movie, where Abuela is trying desperately to not show the town that there is something wrong. And Mirabel is seeing it. She's pointing it out. And it's just scary to think about, because nobody wants to think that there's a problem, and nobody wants to think that the problem is them. And that is a big thing also in like Latina communities, where it's like nobody wants to believe that there is a problem, especially if the problem is them.
Right. And I think that what you guys say kind of mirrors a lot about like Inside Out, right? The whole thing, like it's okay to cry, like sadness, that emotion, it's okay to have that, like all together. We need to like accept our all of the feels, right? And I think that, if you've lived through trauma and you know that another trauma is coming, like your defense mechanisms start to put up walls. You start to like, you don't want to face that because it's scary. You've been through it, and you don't want to go through it again. You don't want to like, what if the house fell apart? They don't have a way to protect them from, because really it's a refugee story, right? Like they're running, they're trying to protect, they had to leave their home, they're trying to protect themselves. So Abuela's, you know, her fear is that she can no longer protect all these people and they will go through the same thing again, and that exhaustion. And, maybe you're just trying to put off the inevitable as long as you can. And so, it's a traumatic experience just to accept that something is wrong. And, but you have to accept it. Like you said, Amanda, if you don't acknowledge the crack, you cannot repair it. And I think that, like, one of the things that I really loved about the story is the community feel, because the Madrigal family was all about supporting their community and the people around them. And at the end of the film, the community comes back and says, we have you. You had our backs. We have your backs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, I would have been okay with them have never getting their powers back, right? Like I would have been okay with the story ending in a way where it was the community that was the true gift. It was the community that, like, saved these magical people, and that together, with powers or without, you were enough, and the community would stand by you and would accept you, and they would all still be together and they would get through it together. I love the way the film ended, but that's another take I would have also been really happy with, because I did like the idea of just like, you don't need your powers. We can still love you for who you are. But I know that these magical characters are based in realism, and they're based on, like our personalities. Like, for example, is it Camilo?
Camilo, yeah.
He, in the production notes, I noticed that they said that he represented the teenager who, doesn't really know where they fit, who's going through phases, who's one day into this, next day into that, and is just trying to figure out who they are. So I get that their powers are supposed to reflect that, which I think is really great. But I think I would have been okay with the film ending either way.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like, I did love the fact that we could see so many stories in one film. Because you have, Dolores' story of like that unrequited love. You have the, Isabella, who she, doesn't want to be perfect. She wants to, not fit into like this, like, role that she's supposed to fit into. You have Luisa, who's taking on she's taking on the weight of the world, and, she's starting to crack under the pressure. And, Abuela's trauma. Like, there's just so many stories in one film. And I think that that's my favorite thing about this film, is just the beautiful way they were able to tie it in. Just the fact that it's a family film, and you don't have, like, in a lot of Disney stories, your protagonist is by themselves. They're out on their own. They're going through this journey by themselves. And this is one of the first time you see them just really, you don't have to do it alone. Everybody's there. Everybody's with you. And I love that. I absolutely love that. Are there any other changes you guys would have made to the film if you could?
I think, kind of going off of what like Kristen said, if there was like a half scene between, and this is not necessarily my personal, because again, like I love the movie pretty much the way that it is. I do wish the down point had been a bit longer. And to kind of fix that, like kind of going off of what Kristen said, maybe like a half scene more. Because again, like you said, most of the time the protagonist in Disney movies are alone. Meanwhile, we had a whole family here, and we had parents here, which is something that is glaringly lacking from a lot of Disney movies. I wonder why. That could be, but we had parents and we had grandparents, and that's not something that's common. So we finally had those characters to work with. And I feel like that half scene that could have been after the house crumbled and before Abuela went to go find Mirabel could have been with Abuela, with her kids, with Julieta, with her sons-in-laws, being, because remember, we have this one scene when she's kind of talking to the candle, and pleading to Pedro, wondering why things aren't working out, wondering what's wrong, wondering like why things aren't working out, why things are cracking, why they're about to lose everything again. And she's concerned, she's scared, but she doesn't have anyone to go to. And I think that's another thing that, and I've had a whole conversation in my comment section for days because people were like, Abuela's older, she should know better. And I'm just like, but how is she supposed to know better if nobody was there to teach her? Because after her village was pillaged and they were ran out, she was a single mother to triplets. So there was nobody there to teach her how to be a mother, to teach her how to be like a person. Everybody looked at her and her magic candle and said, what do we do now? And so she kind of just had to wing it. She had to figure it out. And she didn't have a starting point to go off of because at that point she was basically totally alone. She had a community, but she was the head of the community. She didn't have the shoulder to cry on. So I think if there had been a moment between her and her children kind of being like, I don't know where things went wrong. I don't know why I tried so hard and things didn't work out, because that's ultimately what happened. She tried so hard and things didn't work out, and it was because of the cracks in the family, because of the dynamic, because of the pressure. And I think there needed to maybe be a moment between her and her children where they opened up about what they felt, because we had Julieta, who had to be on her grind cooking all the time to make sure that she could fix somebody's broken face. We had Pepa, who she could control the weather, but don't do it in a bad way, don't cause a storm. And we had Bruno, who basically was there being like, okay, you're asking me these questions, I'm telling you the answer, and you just don't like what I hear. And I think had we had even a scene or a half scene of the children opening up like the grandchildren did, that maybe that would have kind of made a bridge between Abuela going to Mirabel and realizing that the crack started with her, and to be able to fix it, she has to mend her relationship with Mirabel. Because I feel that kind of is what disconnected some people in the audiences. Were like, I feel like they forgave Abuela too fast. I don't personally believe they forgave Abuela too fast, but that's on me. And I do believe that forgiveness is a personal choice. So I think to be able to make it palatable to a broader audience, I think a scene between Abuela and her 3 children would have maybe solidified the fact that she realized what happened and that she needed to be honest about what happened and not give a sugar-coated version of the story and be like, this is exactly what happened. I thought I was going to be a different woman. And that's what she said. She's like, I thought I was going to be a different woman. I thought I was going to have a different life. And then I had to figure it out. And the only person that could help me was me, basically. So I think that would have kind of clarified everything and made people feel a little bit better if she had also acknowledged that her children had the same issues that her grandchildren had.
Yeah. And I kind of feel the same. I think maybe that half scene would be with Peppa and Julieta, because one, that kind of sets up her moment with Bruno as well, that of course she's going to accept him immediately. But it is, I feel like it kind of goes back to Luisa and Isabella, of course, Mirabel and Bruno are parallels of each other, right? They either didn't have a gift or didn't have a gift that contributed to the family. They weren't sure how they were going to help. And so the burden was left on the other 2 sisters, so in doing that, you're also adding additional pressure onto them, so it's that moment of okay, because we've been unfair to your, the youngest, we're also adding too much burden to you. And I feel the same with you. I don't think, sometimes I feel like Abuela is getting a bad rap in some of these moments.
I agree.
Obviously, yes, the way that, it's not right the way she's treating them. But I think like you said, and we see where she came from. She did, expect to be a different woman. And just the tragedy that, again, all of the pressure was put on her. It was her husband's sacrifice that kind of saved the entire community. And as a single heartbroken mother, she's looked to by the entire community. She's not just the matriarch of the Madrigal family, but of the entire Encanto community, which is a lot of pressure for someone. And before, she even expected her kids to have any sort of gift, so of course, when everyone's looking to you, I could see why you'd be like, okay, we are blessed with these powers, so the only way, the best thing we can do is just like to give back. Like maybe that's why we are here, because Pedro saved the entire community. We have to continue that, and again, I think it's just, yeah. I have a lot of feels around Abuela. Like, she doesn't make the right choices, but I think you see the cracks starting to heal as well, as we see later on in the film. So it is, these are things that are going to keep going. And yeah.
I think with Abuela too, so we're so used to the formula of Disney movies where you have like the antagonist, you have like the bad guy, and almost always the bad guy dies at the end, or something catastrophic happens at the end. And it teaches that, like, oh, if you do bad things will happen to you, so don't do the bad things. But there's not a lot of gray area, right? So Abuela is definitely a gray area character because, she's not the villain in this story. She's just someone who made some bad choices, but she wasn't trying to make those bad choices. She wasn't, I think you did a TikTok about this, Amanda, about you compare her to the mother in Entangled. She didn't have these like bad intentions, and I think that Disney formula makes it harder for people who aren't paying attention to like the nuances and the little like subtle things to kind of like swallow. They're just like, oh, well, there's no consequence, but they're not paying attention to like all the consequence that was suffered. And so I think also Disney did a really nice job of showing religion in a way that was like palatable. So like the candle is that spirituality. Abuela talking to Pedro is like, that kind of like, oh, praying to God, like, God, why isn't this? God, why isn't that? Like, why is everything, I've done everything right. I've done everything I could think of. I've tried my best. Like, why is everything falling apart? Why are we losing these powers, And how many times have people had those feelings in their lives, right? And so I think Disney did a really good job, because especially for like the Latinx community, religion is a very, very deep part of their lives. And when Abuela had nobody, she had the candle. She had her faith keeping her going, keeping her, giving her strength, right? And so I think it was really interesting the way Disney showed that spirituality through the magic candle, through the gifts, the blessings that they received, right? And always having like that optimism. Because if you think about it, like, Abuela could have had a very bitter reaction to what had happened in her life, right? This could have just as easily been a curse. She's burdened with having to protect these communities. She's burdened with like all of these things, yet she always saw it as a blessing. She never took it as like, oh, I have to do all of these things. She wanted to. She felt like, it was her responsibility to the community, to everybody. And she told everybody it was a blessing. She never made it feel like it was a burden. So I think Abuela gets a really bad rap.
And they directly call it a miracle.
Yeah.
And
it's funny too, because like I fully agree that Abuela gets a bad rap. And it's one of those things where I had an abuela figure in my life, but my abuelita wasn't the abuela, if that makes any sense. Like, I had an abuela, they were not necessarily abuela,
Yeah.
So I've had figures in my life who have gone through awful, awful things. I've had like family members who have done not so great things. And again, this is a very, I know every like family from any background can have these experiences, but particularly in a Latina household, a lot of things where it's just like, don't let people see you cry. Don't let people see like your vulnerability. Don't let people think that they can step on you. That was the biggest thing in my house. Don't let people think they can step on you. And don't let people think that you are vulnerable. Don't let people think that they can take anything from you. And that is passed down from generations, even if you didn't necessarily have to run away from anything, because my grandparents on both sides are Puerto Rican, and they moved to New York in the 50s, and my daddy was born in Puerto Rico, but he was a baby when they brought him over. So there are a bunch of New Yorkers in my family. Just you throw a rock, you hit a New Yorker. But and so I grew up in the States, but I also grew up in a family who had this mindset passed down from generation to generation of like, you have to be the strong one. You are strong. Don't let people think you're weak. You cannot be weak. And that comes from a place of protection. That comes from a place of not knowing where you could end up, not knowing what someone could do to you, not knowing what could happen to you if you were seen as weak. And I don't think a lot of people quite get that if they haven't grown up in that kind of household, because they think this person said a mean thing to me, so they must hate me. And I think it's because I went to therapy. I think it's because I just kind of worked it out. But like, it's like, hallelujah for therapy. But it's, you have to kind of also look at the nuances. It's like, are they a bad person or did they do a bad thing? You know? And I think that's kind of the case of Abuela, where it's like I say it over and over because people like to get it twisted. They like to say if you have any nuances to something that you're an apologist to whatever. And I said it multiple times. I was like, Abuela wasn't right. Abuela did bad things. And Abuela said bad things. She's not the villain. Because there's a difference between a villain and an antagonist. And there's a difference between an antagonist and a bad person. And I could look at the nuances of her character and be like, yes, I've experienced an abuela, and it's also a personal choice to forgive. No one forced Mirabel to accept abuela into her life. Nobody forced Mirabel to be like, you know what, this is fine, because you know what, she acknowledged it wasn't fine, and they worked to change it. That's the biggest thing. People keep saying, oh, if you say abuela isn't the villain, then you are erasing people's trauma. You're just dismissing people's trauma. And I'm like, coming from a person who has experienced trauma myself, that's kind of a very black and white way to think about it. Because acknowledging that someone has nuances to why they act the way they act, and acknowledging that someone may not be a bad person just because they did bad things, doesn't mean that me, myself, a person behind a screen is erasing your trauma and your experience. That's not what that means. It means that not every situation is the same. And it means that not every person is the same, and not every person's reaction is the same. And Mirabel choosing to stay with her family and accept them and have them accept her, because she didn't stay with them having them not accept her. That's the thing. That's the thing that people miss. She didn't forgive Abuelita and still have Abuelita treating her that way, because that would have been dismissing it. That would have been, okay, Abuela's still treating her poorly, and she's going to accept it. She didn't accept it. And that's the biggest thing that people are ignoring. Mirabel did not accept Abuela's treatment of her. She worked to change it. She showed Abuela, this isn't right. This is how you're treating me, and this is why the miracle is dying. And Abuela took it upon herself to be like, oh, it really is my fault. Okay. And reflected on it, and they built the house back up together. And that's why I kind of get a little bit up in arms when people are just like, put Abuela in a home. And I'm like, no, don't put Abuela in a home, because Abuela did what a lot of people can't do, acknowledge that it was a mistake and acknowledge that she was wrong. And she did say sorry. And it was up to the family to forgive her, and they did. So somebody saying they shouldn't have forgiven her, why? Because you wouldn't have? That's up to you. That's not what this story was about. And there has to be kind of a separation of like, that may have been your story, but that's not this story. That's not right. Mirabel's story. And that's not the story of someone like Mirabel. It's not, sometimes it's not about you. And that's what some people have to kind of realize, where it's just like, yeah, like, here's the thing. It's like, I've been a Bruno. I don't live on the same side of this country as my family. Like, I only talked to about 4 of them. And guess what? They're the ones who made the effort to talk to me. And that's what people don't get, where it's like, I've been a Bruno and I have a Hispanic family, so there's a lot of people, and I only talk to like 4. So do not sit here and try to school me about how I don't understand you. I do. And it's just, you have to kind of look at it from outside of yourself. And also remember that it's a Disney movie, and right. They are going to try to make these difficult topics palatable to children. Why would you end this in a horrible way? If you want misery, go watch HBO. You know, like, yeah. If you want people to have horrible consequences and go to jail and die, watch HBO. Don't watch a Disney movie targeted toward children with a message to help children understand a difficult topic and be like, why didn't it end horribly for this one character? Because that's not what the story was about. We have stories like that. That's not what this one was about. And you just kind of have to look at it that way. Because if you want somebody having horrible repercussions for the awful things they made, go watch Tangled. Mother Gothel fell out a window. Like, it's like, you can watch that, but that's not what Encanto was about.
Yeah, and I think so my first run of watching Encanto, the whole time I thought, is Maribel a therapist? Like, is that what her role is? And so, like, my sister is a therapist, and I'm very lucky in the sense that, like, at a moment's notice, I can get some quick therapy that I might need, right? Because I could just text my sister and be like, blah 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 blah, and she'll like work it through with me, and so I get professional advice on a dime. And so when I was watching Encanto, the whole time I kept thinking, I feel like Maribel's like my sister. She's like the one kind of like trying to figure out what's going on, but why are people this way? But why is this happening? But why that? And not judging, right? Just kind of trying to figure it out. So like Bruno, to me, when I saw him, I was like, oh, he's like the family scapegoat, right? He was saying things and people didn't like it. And he felt that like, oh, they don't like me, so I'm just going to go away. That doesn't make me love you any less, right? Because he's over there fixing the house and everything, But he was kind of like the family scapegoat. He brought all of their problems to light, or like uncomfortable things to light. And so people didn't want to hear that, right? But Maribel is more like the therapist. We're like, no, we have to work through this. Like, why don't you want to hear this? What's going on? And so the whole time I kept thinking, I feel like Maribel's just like, her gift is like being a therapist. Is that like weird? But that was what I thought, like my first run reading into it. And I think that, especially like when we're talking about generational trauma, and Amanda, what you were saying, like, you can't be weak. Like, I know in my family, anytime I was really upset or going through something, my mom would always say, take it out on the walls. If you're angry, scrub the wall, scrub the floor, go clean, go do something. And that's your therapy, right? Like, don't, like you said, don't talk about your pain. Till this day on social media, I cannot share anything negative. Like, I cannot share anything sad. If I experience death, if I experienced like, losing somebody really important to me, if something happened, I cannot talk about it on social media because we don't talk about that kind of stuff. We just put on everything's fine. We share like, very like happy things, but like, even if I wanted to, I couldn't, because it's like drilled into me that like, you carry on, you keep going, you don't show any emotion. And I think that's like something that's been passed down. I'm first generation here. My parents are from Mexico, and, they've just always struggled. Everything has been a struggle, yet they never act like it's a struggle. Everything is a struggle, but they're just like, it's fine. Everything's great. Everything's great. And that's how I kind of see like Abuela is like, she's just like, everything's fine. Don't talk about the trauma. Keep going, keep going. So to me, I feel like Maribel was like the family therapist, kind of getting everybody to heal.
Yeah. And the motorcyclist. Okay. Motorcyclist out today. Wow, they're out to play. And kind of like, you see that within her room and within her costuming, because even though we don't see her actually sewing anything, we know that she's a seamstress because she has a sewing machine in her room. She made Antonio his little stuffed animal, and it was so cute because then he ended up getting an actual real life version of that stuffed animal. So it's kind of like Mirabelle, in a weird way, is kind of like a manifester. Like, she can make things and craft things into existence. And you see all over her dress, she has something from everyone in her family, right down to her glasses being green for Bruno.
Yeah.
Yeah. You good?
Outside of Bruno, she's the only one that wears green.
Yeah, she has the green frames for Bruno. She has the flowers on her dress for Isabella. She has an embroidery for every single one of her family members all along her dress. And yeah, it's beautiful. Like, if you look at
the
it,
attention to detail in like the costuming alone is just amazing.
It's because, and you see it, and you even in her song, she's like, I mend what's broken. So she is kind of like that therapist, and she has that mending creation ability, because you see, I even said it, where it's just like she made Antonio his little stuffed animal, and lo and behold, he gets a big giant live version of that stuffed animal. And so
This
she
movie
can
is so
create.
damn good.
It is so good. It's great. And she can create, she can make, she can mend. And that is kind of like the nature of a seamstress, where people have patterns, and she has patterns, and she can put them together. And she has all of these things that she can put together and sew together and seam together. And that's what she is to her family. She is the seamstress. She puts them all together. And then it's kind of at the end solidified where she's in the middle, and the door is centered around her. So I don't think that her power necessarily is a quite literal one of something tangible to be able to be seen. And I think it's also indicative of the door disappearing, because we see her talking to Casita the way that Abuela talks to Casita. And while Casita can talk to basically anyone, we don't see them interacting with it nearly as much as Mirabel does. She can ask the Casita to do something, and it does it. And so she's kind of like the heartbeat of that family. And it is implied that once Abuela has passed, she will be the matriarch, and she will be the glue that keeps them together. Because that's what matriarchs are for a lot of families. That's what abuelas are. That's what my abuelita was. She was the glue. And so at the end of the day, Mirabel is going to be the glue. And that's what she was through the entirety of the movie, because she goes around to all these individual characters and figures out what's going on with them, figures out what's going on with Luisa, what's going on with Isabela, what's going on with Dolores, being like, what are you hearing? What's going on? And kind of piecing together all those pieces and creating the picture. And you even see her like piecing together Bruno's vision. She always pieces things together. So it's such awesome visual storytelling to show that she is literally the maker, the creator, the manifester of things. And it's beautiful. Like Encanto is such a dang good movie. I'm like, even talking about it, I'm like, oh, it's so good.
It's so good.
And I think and it goes back to like your concept of like the healing's not, the healing will still be ongoing, because like when you have like a rip in your shirt and you sew it up, like it doesn't mean that rip isn't still there. It's still there, but then maybe you could like add some embroidery on top of it. Maybe you can like turn it into something new. And that's, I think, speaks to Mirabel. And I love that, yes, we do see that she's a maker. She's a, seamstress. She embroiders. That they don't need to tell us that. It's all in the details, and it's paralleled in the actions that she takes. So everything you said, perfection.
This movie's so good, you guys.
It's so good.
I'm not over it.
I need to watch it again. I just watched it yesterday, so I'm supposed to do round 3 now.
I watched it a few days ago, and I'm just like, husband goes to work, watches Encanto for the how many time? Like,
so going on, because we don't have too much time, I do want to talk about favorite songs. So we don't talk about Bruno, written obviously by Lin-Manuel Miranda, surpassed Frozen's Let It Go as the biggest Disney song, and it's currently, as of right now, number 4 on the top 100s, which is huge. Do you have any favorite songs, and why or why not?
All right. I think Kristen, you should answer this first. I want to know what your favorite is.
I have a feeling, is it bad that I'm already guessing what my Spotify Wrapped is going to be for 2020? It's going to be like, you listen to the Encanto soundtrack a lot. I feel like I have been re-listening to, like, we don't talk about Bruno, because again, it's just so good. There's so many layers that it's like, well, I sung along with Camila this time, so for the next round, I'm going to have to sing along with Isabella. But there's really no bad song. I think Waiting on a Miracle is just such a beautiful I want song. And it's like that first acknowledgement of, Mirabel's not fine. And then Dos Oreguitas, like, I kind of can't listen to the English one, if only because like my Spanish is terrible, so it's a lot harder for me to like understand it in Spanish. So it's like I can make it through the Spanish one if I understand the words. I'm not going to be able to get through without crying. So there's not a bad song on that soundtrack. And then even just the score itself, just beautiful and fantastic. And I think the way that like Lynn's songs and the instrumental play with each other, it's pretty seamless. So yeah, I copped out. I'm not really giving an answer.
The whole thing's a bop.
Just all of it.
I think other than We Don't Talk About Bruno, and I'm so glad you pointed out, I sang to Camilo's part this song, so I'm going to sing to Isabella. That's exactly how I listen to the song. I'll listen to it back to back just to sing along to the different characters.
I'm glad I'm the only one that does that. I do that with like every musical that has layered parts. It's like, well, 4 people singing, I'm going to have to listen 4 times.
Every person that sees me on my commute must think that I am a loon, but it's fine. It's okay. I accept it. This is just how I am. But other than We Don't Talk About Bruno, one of my favorites is Surface Pressure for several reasons. And one of the main reasons is that it's finally an alto that's not a villain. And I've always had a lower voice. I've always had a deeper voice. When I was in chorus in school, I was an alto too. And every girl wanted to be the soprano. Every girl wanted to have like the high, like melodic, like parts in the songs. And then there was the alto too. And so it was kind of nice to see a character who had a deeper voice, who had a powerful voice, who was able to sing like multiple different like ranges within the song, but still remain low enough to not like crack a glass. And it was so nice to see like this kind of dichotomy of like masculine and feminine, where it's just like the strong one, but she still is like having clouds and glitter and like all these beautiful things and girly things and wearing a dress and not like having to automatically be put in like a mannish thing just because she's the big strong one. She was able to hold on to that femininity and have all the glitter and have the weird donkey fantasy thing and
with
just
eyeshadow.
And they were serving RuPaul realness, like just donkey RuPaul. That's all I want to see in 2022. But it was just so nice to see like some like a woman that wasn't just like teeny tiny waifish like high voice traditional Disney and still have femininity. It was just kind of nice to see that like represented and have her not diminished into some big burly mannish like hulking character, because that's what happens a lot. If a woman is like masculinized, she's made into a joke. And so I loved seeing the fact that she wasn't joked about. It wasn't a joke and it was serious, and she was having all these issues and had so much pressure, and she was cracking, and she was able to cry and have these vulnerable moments and just be like, I'm not doing good, y'all. Like, I'm straight up not having a good time. I just want glitter. I just want clouds. I want to cry. And I feel that because there are just days where I'm like, I want glitter. I want clouds. I want to cry. Like, so it was just a really good, relatable song to have from a character who wasn't just like the traditional, like gorgeous, tiny little Disney soprano, you know? And then, of course, We Don't Talk About Bruno living in my head rent free. Yeah.
I just want to say something about Luisa's, the way she was made. There is like a detail about Luisa that blew my mind. If you look at like the close-ups shots of Luisa, you can see the hair on her arms and her back and her neck. And like, let me tell you how much I loved that. Because as a woman, you're supposed to be like hairless and perfect and nothing. And if you're Hispanic like I am and you have dark hair, that means your peach fuzz and everything, everywhere facial hair is dark, right? And it's noticeable unless you like painfully wax or thread or whatever. You know, there's like, you have to basically like have these Eurocentric beauty standards, right? But Luisa was so beautiful anyways. And like,
and I think,
sorry.
And even her struggles within that song, it's never tied to like her physique or her femininity. It's just like her struggle is like taking on too much and feeling worthless because, you know, she just doesn't have like the physical strength. But it's also like, you know, this woman has like, she trains all the time. Like, she trains all the time. She always wants to be better. That it was nice that it wasn't, you know, we didn't get any like pot shots to her like her appearance or anything like that. Like,
yeah. Like
give her a whole movie. Give them all their own movie.
Like the fact that her appearance was never even mentioned. Like she just was Luisa.
She just was.
And I love that so much because especially like as a Hispanic woman, especially as a brown woman, you have this whole thing of people trying to masculinize you and try to like make you feel like you're not pretty enough, you're not girly enough, you're not this, you're not that, you're not everything. And I had that growing up. I had that problem last week. Like it's literally an ongoing issue where people try so hard to strip you of your femininity and strip you of the things that you just kind of want to be girly and you just want to be like have your nails and your makeup and your glitter and like sob. Like you just want to have those moments of like being openly feminine without being questioned. And that was so great about Luisa, where I'm just like, she could just be her. And none of her family took a dig at her at all. Nobody in the town took a dig at her. Nobody said anything about her appearance, how tall she was, how bulky she was, nothing. They just let her be Luisa. And I was like, yes. Because like you always have whenever, again, when I said where I'm like, we always have like a character who's outside of the quote unquote norm. And what are they? They're a punchline. And nobody was a punchline here. If anybody was a punchline, it was Camilo, just like having his face all out of whack when he changed into like 4 different people. But even that was a fantastical thing. That wasn't just punching down. That was just him coughing and turning into like 4 different villagers at the same time.
You literally have 2 different eyes and like, you know,
right. And then with Camilo, it was a moment of stress, right? He couldn't control what was going on with him. He was freaking out, right?
It's like, Camilo, fix your face.
But yeah, I just, you know, and also while we're on this note really quick, I saw a TikTok and I wish I would have saved it, but it was this girl who had gotten a nose job a few years ago. And she said, if a movie like Encanto had come out when I was little, maybe I wouldn't have wanted to change my indigenous nose. And I was just like, oh,
yeah,
like, wow. And so I just love the way these characters are drawn. I just love it. But as far as music, the first time that I watched it, I sobbed to Luisa's, you know, Surface Pressure. And not because it, like, I related to it, but because I saw my mom constantly just, like, trying to, like, have the weight of the world on her shoulders. Like, right now, during the pandemic, she was flying to Mexico back and forth, taking PPE to the towns that had like nothing, taking money. She was like, she doesn't have to work, but she keeps going to work so she can help people in her hometown. So she can help people in like family members in like another country. So she can do all these things. She could retire. She can just be chill, but she doesn't want to because she can't live with like the guilt of like, what's going on in other places to the people that she loves in other places. And so when I saw Luisa's, you know, the scene where she's just got like literally the world on her shoulders, I was like sobbing because I was just thinking of my mother, just like trying to help everybody, trying to be strong for everybody, even though like, you know, it's like, you're going to crack eventually. There's no way you can like save everyone, help everyone, do everything and be everything to everyone. And so I was sobbing through that one. But I think that my favorite song is We Don't Talk About Bruno, mainly because of all the people that are in it and all the parts and everybody that's singing it. It's so fun. And like you guys said, like you can watch it every time and just follow one character. And it's just, it's so much fun. And I am like, I cannot wait for the live action version of that because I need that, whether it's a musical or a live action movie or whatever. I just need to see that played out because I think it's beautiful. Dos Oruguitas, I hate it because I cry and I just hate it. I cannot listen to that song. I listened to once and every time I have rewatched Encanto, I skip that part because I can't like. I don't know what it is. It was just it hit too hard for me. Maybe now I've seen the movie so many times, but I keep skipping that part because I think I'm just like a little traumatized by it. Because even though I think Disney did a very beautiful job of telling a very scary and like traumatic thing, like showing it on screen so that kids can understand it. If you and your family have lived through something like that, it's hard to even watch the Disney sugar-coated version of that. So Dos Oruguitas, like it's beautiful, but I hate it because like I'm like, oh, too close to no, I can't. Like I can't. And so I think that is just the power of Lin-Manuel Miranda's writing, is that he is just like, he can just hit emotions everywhere. And so I think, I know we've said it, the whole soundtrack is a bop, but I really loved We Don't Talk About Bruno, mainly because I'm a sucker for an ensemble cast. And that song just hits, everybody's in it, and I love that.
And just to kind of springboard off of Dos Orejitas, several parts of that song, same thing where it's like it came up on my playlist and I was just like, I'm not prepared to cry right now. I just had to. I'm just like, I'm not prepared for this right now, because like that whole scene, especially the one that hits the hardest, it's like etched into my brain, is just her after everything's happened, after she's in her new house and no one else is around her and she's on the floor holding all of her babies. And she's just like looking down at them, and her eye, like she's just glazed over. And that scene is kind of the scene where I'm just like, if you look at that and you can't think, I don't want to get misty eyed. I did my makeup for this so that this wouldn't happen. And I'm like, if you can't look at that woman, that young woman, sitting by herself on the floor after the worst thing in her life has happened to her, holding these 3 innocent babies who didn't even know what happened. And nobody else is around her. Nobody's around the house. Nobody's in the house. Nobody's cooking for her, cleaning for her, doing anything. She's on the floor by herself. And her eyes are glazed over. And if you can't look at that and go, this woman also deserves happiness, then bestie, we should go to therapy together. Like, I'm just like, because I know, like, it was like Abuela frustrated me to no end throughout the whole movie. And I was frustrated as well. I had my moments as well. And then I saw that and I was just like, this is what that movie's about. And it kind of just hit, like, I was literally on my floor. It was Christmas. It was Christmas Eve. I was on my floor on Christmas Eve, and I was like sick with the Rona, and I'm just like, ugh! And like everything was like down my face, and it was disgusting, and nobody should have seen me like that. And I just kind of had that and the song itself, where it's just like these caterpillars have to turn into butterflies, and they have to change, and they have to separate to come back together again. And that's what this whole movie is about. It's about change. It's about transition. It's about like letting go of the past and moving into the future and doing things better the next time. And overall, that's what this movie is about. And the people who just like went over their head and they're like, put Abuela in a home. I'm like, you missed the whole point. I'm so sorry. I know everybody has. I know everyone has their opinions, but you're entitled to your wrong opinion, homie. Like this is the one time where I'm just like,
we saw 2 different movies.
I was just like, we didn't see the same movie, homie. You gotta watch it again. So like,
and I get that art is subjective, right? Yeah. So like people see what they want to see. And I think, talking back, on Luisa, for example, there's a lot, and even with Isabella, there's a lot of people saying like, oh, she represents like trans, or she represents, and Isabella represents LGBTQ community. And I get, like, I didn't see it that way, but I get why people felt that way. But also, I think it speaks to the fact that we're all looking for representation, right? We're all looking for, like, to see ourselves in a Disney film somehow, in some way. And I think that this film did such a good job of being able to, like, portray so many different people. And I think that it also speaks to that there's still so many people who don't have their representation, and hopefully them voicing these opinions will, like, oh, well, I think it's this, I think it's that, might spark something at Disney where maybe they will get a film like that that's, specifically concrete for them or for anybody. But yeah, I just think that maybe, this is like a really good step in that direction to get more representation, in all kinds of ways, and I think that the way people react to it just shows how desperately we want to see ourselves in stories like this.
For sure. Well said.
And I fully agree. Like I'm a queer Latina. I'm a bisexual Latina. So like I understand where they could find the parallels. But at the end of the day, I I watch a lot of things, and I'm a big, massive nerd, and I love tropes, and I love like breaking down why stories are the way they are and why characters are the way they are. And again, it's kind of a separation of yourself and your story versus somebody else and somebody else's story. So watching this, I'm like, I knew this was about family. I knew this was about generational trauma. I knew that while you can have these headcanons, while you can see yourself sometimes at its core, the story isn't about that. And like, even like for me, I'm just like, yeah, no, I can totally see why you would think Isabella is a lesbian. That's perfectly cool. And I could totally, and there's just a lot of nuances as to why sometimes it's not like that either. And that's one thing where like some people, especially like when they see someone, they think that you think one certain way because of how you look or because of how you are or because of like something that they went through with someone like you, so that they must all be like this. And I've had a lot of people make assumptions about me. I put myself on the internet and people are open to interpretation, but at the very end of the day, it's like my page says nerd content, and I'm a nerd, and at my core I have all of these qualities, but at the same time, I can look at other things that are not when they don't have to do with me either, you know?
Right.
And with that being said, I would also love to see a queer Latina woman of color on screen one day too. And I hope that's coming soon because it's nice to see yourself. Like even Stephanie Beatriz, she's bisexual. Her character in Brooklyn Nine-Nine is bisexual, and that is a queer Latina right there. And she's the main character in a Disney movie. And that's another thing too. Speaking of Mirabel's uh her dress, it's the bisexual flag colors for Stephanie Beatriz. So it's really sweet that they also incorporated parts of the people who made those characters come to life. And it's just also just indicative that we are in a step in the right direction. And is it going to be perfect? No. And is again, I had to wait till my mid 20s to see someone who looked like me and someone who was like me in a Disney movie. But that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. And it doesn't mean that it's just completely like, that's it. That's good. We still have a lot of work to do. And one day we are going to be able to see everyone portrayed. And I hope it's sometime soon because it would be awesome. Because again, like you said, if that one woman had seen Encanto before she got a nose job, she wouldn't have gotten it. And it's so important to see yourself. It's so important to see portrayals of people who look like you, who are like your family, like Pepa and Felix. They look like my parents. Like my dad is a dark skinned Puerto Rican. My mom is a light Puerto Rican. Like they just, it matters. It matters to be able to see yourself. And I think when people have seen themselves all throughout their lives, they're not going to understand that. And when people have like always grown up with someone who looks like them, have always grown up with the story they relate to, they're not going to understand why it impacts people so badly when they finally get it. Because when you've always gotten something, you can't miss it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, before we wrap up, was there anything else you wanted to point out about the film that maybe we didn't discuss?
I'm worried if I say anything, I'll just be talking for another 2 hours.
We could literally do an episode per character, per everything. Like, there's so much to discuss.
Yeah. It's like, it's one of those, this story and this movie was complete on its own. If I hope they consider not necessarily a sequel, but like living with these characters again. I do want to see them in a different capacity in some way, shape, or form. Again, this is like the biggest movie with an ensemble, so to speak. Like, I don't think we've really had like this many characters who may not have been like the headliners, right? But they all had a journey. So like Luisa, supporting character, and Isabella were supporting technically, but like they had their own journeys. So I would just I don't want this to be the last time that we see the Madrigals. I want
maybe like a
this
Disney
to live
Plus
on.
series.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
Or like a day with Tio Bruno. Just give me that. Like everybody's like hanging out with Tio Bruno one day. I don't know. That's all. Just give me more.
I mean,
but
Olaf
also I don't want like
spin-off shows. Maybe just like little specials here and there.
Give me a little something.
Like a little Disney, like a little special, like how each of the couples met. That'd be so cute. Like just kind of like seeing a little peek into their lives would be amazing. Like, again, like you said, like Olaf had like 11, like just little, I'm pretty sure it wasn't 11, but it felt like 11. Just little mini shorts that started before movies or like were on Disney Plus. So I'm just like, it'd be nice to just have like a couple of little like 20-minute long cute short snippets.
I'd be happy with that. All right, guys. Well, where can people find you on social media?
So I'm on TikTok. I'm Amanda Just Vibin on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I do want to post on YouTube more. I'm just Amanda Castrillo there, but I haven't posted in a hot second. But yeah, if you ever want to just find me, type in Amanda Just Vibin, I'll pop up somewhere.
And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Chavez, which is Kriavez.
This is going to wrap up this episode of the Temple of Geek podcast. We want to thank everyone who tuned in today, and especially our guests, Amanda and Kristen. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to hit us up on Facebook or Twitter by using the handle at Temple of Geek. If you want to check out some of our other episodes or shows, why don't you head on over to templeofgeek.com. There you will find all sorts of content that pertains to the world of geek.